The Barrett M82A1 gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the armory at Forward Operating Base Zulu. Captain Zara Ghost Vasquez ran her cleaning cloth along the rifle's barrel with the practiced precision of someone who had done this ritual 10,000 times before. Each stroke was deliberate, almost meditative, as if the weapon held secrets that only she could understand. The other Marines gave her a wide berth, not out of respect, but out of something closer to disdain mixed with curiosity. Commander Jake Razor Morrison of SEAL Team 6 watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd heard the whispers about the Marine pilot turned sniper, the woman who insisted on maintaining her own equipment despite having an entire armory staff at her disposal. To him, she looked like every other overeager jarhead trying to prove something in a man's world. The brass had assigned her to his team for Operation Nightfall, and he wasn't particularly thrilled about babysitting someone who probably couldn't hit the broad side of a barn. "You know we have people for that," Morrison called out, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that came so naturally to special operations officers. "Unless you don't trust our armorers to do their job." Vasquez didn't look up from her work. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, revealing a thin scar that ran from her left ear to her jawline, a souvenir from a helicopter crash 3 years prior. "I trust them fine, Commander. I just trust myself more." The response was delivered without heat, without defensiveness. It was simply a statement of fact that somehow managed to sound both humble and supremely confident. Morrison found himself studying her more carefully. There was something in the way she moved, the way she held herself, that spoke of experience beyond her apparent years. As she shifted to clean another section of the rifle, the fluorescent light caught something on her left sleeve that made Morrison's breath catch in his throat. There, stitched in silver thread barely visible against the desert camouflage, was a small insignia he recognized all too well. It was a sniper's badge, but not just any sniper's badge. The number beneath it made his blood run cold, 3,247. In the sniper community, that number meant something. It represented the longest confirmed kill shot in Marine Corps history, a shot taken from a distance that defied belief, under conditions that would have broken lesser marksmen. Morrison had heard the story whispered in special operations circles, passed down like a legend. The ghost of Helmand Province, they called the shooter, a mythical figure who had eliminated high-value targets from impossible distances before vanishing back into the shadows. But the ghost was supposed to be a man. Everyone said so. Morrison's smirk faded as he realized he was looking at a legend made flesh, and she was polishing her rifle with the same casual attention most people gave to brushing their teeth. The woman he'd been prepared to dismiss as another quota-filling female Marine was actually one of the most lethal snipers who had ever lived. The realization hit him like a physical blow, rewriting everything he thought he knew about the mission ahead and the person who would be watching his back from 2 miles away. The metallic click of Vasquez snapping her rifle back together echoed through the armory like the sound of a trap closing. 3 days earlier, the briefing room at Camp Lemonnier had been thick with tension and the acrid smell of burnt coffee. Colonel Sarah Hendricks stood before a wall-mounted tactical display showing satellite imagery of the Horn of Africa, her laser pointer tracing red circles around a cluster of buildings nestled in the mountainous terrain along the Somali-Ethiopian border. The assembled Special Operations personnel, SEALs, Force Recon Marines, and Air Force Pararescue, leaned forward in their chairs, absorbing every detail of what promised to be one of the most complex extractions of their careers. "Gentlemen and lady," Hendricks nodded toward the lone female figure seated in the back row, "meet Amara Hassan, also known as the Chemist. Intelligence indicates she's been developing chemical weapons for Al-Shabaab using equipment and materials smuggled in from Libya. More importantly, she's agreed to defect in exchange for safe passage to the United States for herself and her 2 children." The satellite image zoomed in, revealing a fortified compound surrounded by concentric rings of defensive positions. Guard towers punctuated the perimeter like deadly exclamation points, their shadows creating dark geometric patterns across the desert floor. Beyond the compound, the terrain opened into a series of valleys and ridgelines that offered both concealment and killing fields for anyone with the skill to use them properly. The problem, Hendricks continued, is location. Hassan is being held in the central building, roughly 800 meters from the nearest cover suitable for an assault team. The compound sits in a natural bowl surrounded by elevated positions on all sides. In daylight, approaching without being detected is impossible. At night, thermal imaging and motion sensors make the odds only slightly better. Commander Morrison shifted in his seat, already running tactical calculations in his head. 800 meters of open ground against an entrenched enemy was a nightmare scenario, even for SEALs. They'd need suppression fire, smoke cover, possibly air support, all of which would alert every hostile within 50 kilometers of their presence. That's where Captain Vasquez comes in, Hendricks said, her pointer moving to a ridgeline approximately 3 kilometers northeast of the compound. She'll provide overwatch and precision fire support from this position, designated Checkpoint Bravo. The elevation gives her clear lines of sight to the entire compound and surrounding area. Her job is to eliminate specific high-value targets and provide suppression fire during the extraction. Morrison glanced back at Vasquez, taking in her unremarkable appearance with new eyes. She sat perfectly still, her dark eyes focused on the tactical display with an intensity that seemed to absorb every pixel of information. Her uniform was crisp but not parade ground perfect, broken in by someone who wore it to work rather than to impress. On her left breast, he could see the wings of a naval aviator above rows of ribbons that told a story of multiple deployments and commendations. 3 kilometers, Morrison asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Commander, that's an extremely long shot under the best conditions. Add in heat shimmer, wind variation, and target movement. Captain Vasquez has made longer shots, Hendricks interrupted, her tone suggesting the matter was not open for debate. She'll be using a Barrett M82A1 with Raufoss multi-purpose rounds, more than adequate for the mission requirements. The briefing continued with details about insertion methods, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. Morrison found himself only half listening, his attention repeatedly drifting to the woman in the back row. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't put his finger on what. She asked no questions, offered no suggestions, simply absorbed the information like a sponge soaking up water. As the meeting broke up and personnel began filing out, Morrison approached Vasquez. Captain, I'd like to discuss coordination procedures for the overwatch position. My team will be depending on your accuracy. Vasquez looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her face suggested. Your team will be fine, Commander. I don't miss. The simple statement, delivered without boasting or bravado, somehow carried more weight than all the tactical doctrine and marksmanship manuals Morrison had ever studied. As he watched her gather her materials and leave the briefing room, he found himself wondering what kind of experiences could forge that level of quiet confidence. The C-130 Hercules bucked and shuddered through the turbulent air above the Red Sea, its 4 turboprop engines straining against headwinds that threatened to tear the aircraft apart. Inside the cargo bay, 12 special operations personnel checked their equipment one final time, their faces illuminated by the red glow of interior lighting designed to preserve night vision. The air was thick with the smell of JP-8 fuel, gun oil, and the peculiar metallic scent that seemed to permeate all military aircraft. Vasquez sat apart from the others, her back against the aluminum bulkhead, systematically reviewing her gear checklist. Her custom rifle case lay secured beside her, its hard plastic shell covered in shipping labels and custom stickers that told the story of its journey through various military logistics networks. Inside that case was more than just a weapon. It was a precision instrument calibrated to her exact specifications. Every component selected and adjusted based on thousands of rounds fired in combat conditions. Staff Sergeant Miguel Brick Rodriguez, Morrison's point man, glanced over at the lone Marine in their midst. He'd worked with female personnel before, but never in a direct action role, and certainly never one who would be separated from the main element during the most dangerous part of the mission. The idea of depending on someone 2 miles away for fire support went against every instinct drilled into him during 15 years of close-quarters combat. "How long you been doing this, Captain?" Rodriguez asked, raising his voice above the engine noise. "Sniping or flying," Vasquez replied without looking up from her checklist. "Both, I guess." Vasquez considered the question for a moment, her fingers automatically checking the securing straps on her equipment. Started flying right out of the academy. Cobras, mostly. Did 3 deployments as a pilot before transitioning to ground operations. The shooting came naturally after that. "What made you switch?" This from Petty Officer First Class David Torch Kim, the team's explosives expert. "Most pilots I know would rather stay in the air where it's safe." A ghost of a smile crossed Vasquez's face. Safe is relative. Besides, helicopters have a tendency to fall out of the sky when people shoot missiles at them. Figured I'd have better luck with my feet on the ground. The casual reference to being shot down sparked immediate interest from the team. Combat pilots who survived surface-to-air missile attacks were rare enough that their stories became legend in military circles. Morrison found himself studying Vasquez with renewed attention, noting details he'd missed before. The way she moved with economical precision, never wasting energy on unnecessary motion. The unconscious habit of checking her 6 o'clock position even in the relative safety of the aircraft. The thin white lines on her hands that suggested scars from burns or shrapnel. "Where'd that happen?" Morrison asked. "Afghanistan, 2021. We were providing close air support for a patrol that got pinned down by Taliban fighters in a compound near Kandahar. Intel said they had small arms only." Vasquez's voice took on the flat, emotionless tone that combat veterans used when recounting traumatic experiences. Intel was wrong. They had a Chinese-made MANPAD system, probably acquired from Pakistani sources. First missile missed us by maybe 50 feet. Second one didn't. The cargo bay fell silent except for the constant drone of engines. Even the loadmaster, who had been shuffling around checking tie-down straps, stopped to listen. Stories of survival against impossible odds had a way of commanding attention, especially among people who made their living in high-risk situations. "Took a hit in the engine compartment," Vasquez continued. "Lost hydraulics, electrical, pretty much everything except forward momentum. My co-pilot was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound. I managed to auto-rotate into a field about 2 clicks from the compound, but the landing was rough." She flexed her left hand and Morrison caught a glimpse of surgical scars along her wrist. Compound fracture of the radius and ulna, 3 cracked ribs, mild concussion. But I was alive and so was my co-pilot. The Taliban fighters who'd shot us down were already moving toward the crash site. I had my sidearm and maybe 30 rounds of ammunition. They had RPGs and automatic weapons. Rodriguez leaned forward. "How'd you get out?" "I didn't run." Vasquez met his eyes directly. "I found a good position with overlapping fields of fire and made them pay for every meter. Turns out, when you're fighting for your life with nowhere to retreat, you discover things about yourself you never knew before." The insertion went flawlessly, which in Morrison's experience usually meant that everything afterward would go to hell with supernatural efficiency. The MC-130J Combat Talon II had ghosted through Somali airspace at 1,500 feet, below the effective range of most surface-to-air missiles, but high enough to avoid small arms fire from opportunistic gunmen. The aircraft's terrain-following radar painted an invisible path through the mountains. its computers automatically adjusting altitude to maintain a constant distance from the ground below. At precisely 2:30 hours, the rear cargo ramp lowered into the slipstream, creating a rectangular window filled with darkness and stars. The jumpmaster, a grizzled Air Force sergeant with more than 1,000 combat drops under his belt, held up 5 fingers, then 4, then 3. Morrison felt the familiar mix of anticipation and dread that preceded every insertion. No matter how many times he'd done this, the moment of stepping into empty air never lost its ability to spike his adrenaline. 2 minutes later, 12 parachutes bloomed in the darkness like ghostly flowers, barely visible against the star-filled sky. Morrison tracked his team's descent through night vision goggles, watching for any deviation from the planned drop zone. Below them, the terrain rolled in waves of rock and scrub vegetation, broken by deep wadis that could swallow an entire squad if they landed wrong. Vasquez touched down 200 meters from the designated landing site, her parachute collapsing with barely a whisper of sound. She was already rolling up her chute before Morrison's feet hit the ground, her movements efficient and professional. Within 15 minutes, the entire team had consolidated at the rally point, equipment checked and accounted for, ready to begin the 3-hour movement to their objective positions. "Comms check," Morrison whispered into his headset. "Ghost, good copy," came Vasquez's voice through his earpiece, clear and steady. "Brick, good copy. Torch, good copy." One by one, each team member confirmed his radio was functioning properly. Communication failures had killed more special operations missions than enemy action, and Morrison was fanatical about maintaining contact with all elements of his team. They moved in single file through the darkness, Morrison navigating by GPS, while his point man used thermal imaging to scan for potential threats. The terrain was more challenging than the satellite imagery had suggested: loose rock that shifted underfoot, thorny vegetation that caught on equipment, and deep crevices that appeared without warning in the darkness. Progress was slower than planned, but they maintained operational security by avoiding established trails that might be watched or booby-trapped. At the 2-kilometer mark, Vasquez split off from the main group, heading northeast toward her overwatch position. Morrison watched her disappear into the darkness with a mixture of confidence and anxiety. In 6 hours, when the sun came up and his team began their assault on the compound, she would be their lifeline, the difference between a successful extraction and a catastrophic failure. "Ghost copies, moving to overwatch position." Her voice crackled through his earpiece 30 minutes later. "Roger, Ghost, ETA to position." 30 mics, will call when established." Morrison acknowledged and continued leading his team toward their assault positions. The compound was still invisible in the distance, but he could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on the surrounding landscape. Somewhere in that collection of buildings, Amara Hassan was waiting for rescue, unaware that 12 Americans were moving through the darkness to bring her home. The mission clock showed 3:47 hours when Ghost's voice whispered through the radio, "Overwatch established. I have eyes on target." Morrison felt a small knot of tension release in his chest. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part. Dawn in the Horn of Africa arrived like artillery barrage, the sun exploding over the eastern ridgeline and transforming the landscape from monochrome shadows into a palette of browns, tans, and burnt oranges. From her position 3 kilometers northeast of the target compound, Vasquez watched the transformation through the Schmidt and Bender scope mounted on her Barrett M82A1, the world compressed into a circular window of magnified reality. The compound sprawled across nearly 2 acres of relatively flat ground, its walls constructed from the same sun-baked clay and stone that comprised most of the surrounding terrain. Guard towers anchored each corner, their elevated positions providing commanding views of all approach routes. Through her scope, Vasquez could count 15 visible sentries, though she knew there were probably twice that number positioned in dead spaces and interior buildings. Ghost has positive identification on primary target building, she whispered into her throat microphone. Center structure, two-story green metal roof, multiple personnel moving around the courtyard. Copy Ghost, Morrison's voice crackled back. Can you identify any high-value targets? Vasquez swept her scope across the compound methodically, cataloging every visible person and weapon system. Years of experience had taught her to read body language and movement patterns, identifying leaders and specialists by the way they carried themselves and interacted with others. Near the main building, she spotted a tall figure in clean fatigues directing the placement of additional defensive positions. Possible HVT main building north side, she reported. Male, approximately 6 feet, clean uniform, appears to be directing defensive preparations. Multiple personnel responding to his commands. Roger, maintain observation. The radio fell silent, leaving Vasquez alone with the desert wind and the weight of responsibility that came with being the team's eyes and ears. At this distance, the people moving through her scope seemed almost like insects, tiny figures scurrying about their business, unaware that death was watching them through a precisely calibrated optical instrument. She shifted slightly, adjusting her position to maintain comfort during what would likely be several more hours of observation. The ghillie suit she wore had been custom-modified for desert operations, its synthetic fibers mimicking the color and texture of the local vegetation so perfectly that she was virtually invisible from more than 50 meters away. Beneath the camouflage, her body armor was the lightest weight compatible with the expected threat level, ceramic plates rated to stop rifle rounds, but thin enough to allow the precise body control required for long-range shooting. At 800 hours, a convoy of 3 vehicles approached the compound from the south, kicking up distinctive dust clouds that were visible for kilometers. Vasquez tracked them through her scope, noting the make and model of each vehicle and counting the personnel who dismounted when the convoy reached the main gate. 8 men, all carrying AK-47 variants, all wearing the mixture of military surplus and civilian clothing that characterized irregular forces throughout the region. Ghost observes vehicle convoy, 3 trucks, 8 personnel all armed, she reported. Convoy has entered compound through main gate. Copy, any change in security posture. Vasquez continued her methodical scan of the compound. The arrival of reinforcements had definitely increased activity levels, with additional sentries moving to previously unoccupied positions, and what appeared to be a briefing session taking place near the main building. Through her scope, she watched the tall figure she'd identified as a possible commander gesturing toward different sections of the perimeter, while his subordinates took notes. Affirmative. Estimate 20+ personnel now visible, with additional positions being manned. Recommend accelerating timeline if possible. Morrison's response came back immediately. Negative. We stick to the plan. Continue observation and report any significant changes. Vasquez acknowledged and settled in for the long wait. The mission timeline called for the assault to begin at 1400 hours, during the afternoon period when heat and fatigue typically reduce the effectiveness of defensive forces. Until then, her job was to watch, catalog, and prepare for the moment when her rifle would transform from an observation tool into an instrument of precision violence. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 40 degrees Celsius, turning the desert into a convection oven that shimmered with heat mirages. Vasquez felt the sweat running down her back beneath the ghillie suit, but she maintained her position and focus with the discipline of someone who had spent years learning to ignore physical discomfort. Through her scope, the compound wavered slightly in the rising heat, creating optical distortions that would make precision shooting more challenging. She made minute adjustments to her scope's parallax setting, compensating for the atmospheric conditions that could throw off a shot by several centimeters at this distance. The Barrett's bipod was extended and locked, its legs firmly planted on a flat section of rock that provided a stable shooting platform. Every detail mattered when engaging targets at extreme range. Wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. Even the rotation of the Earth all combined to affect the trajectory of a bullet traveling more than 3 kilometers. "Ghost, this is Blade 7, Morrison's voice whispered through her earpiece. "Moving to phase line Alpha." Vasquez keyed her radio twice in acknowledgement, maintaining radio silence to avoid compromising the assault team's position. Through her scope, she began tracking the movement of personnel within the compound, noting any changes in routine or alertness levels that might indicate the defenders had detected the approaching Americans. At 13:30 hours, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A figure emerged from the main building escorting two small children, a boy and a girl, both appearing to be under 10 years of age. The woman with them matched the description of Amara Hassan, medium height, wearing a dark headscarf, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew that any wrong step might be her last. "Ghost has eyes on package," Vasquez transmitted. "Female with two children, moving from main building towards secondary structure on the east side." "Copy, Ghost. Can you maintain visual?" Vasquez tracked the small group as they crossed the compound's central courtyard, her crosshairs automatically following their movement, even though she had no intention of engaging civilian targets. The children appeared frightened, staying close to Hassan and glancing nervously at the armed guards positioned throughout the area. This was what the mission was about, not just extracting a valuable intelligence asset, but saving a family from almost certain execution if they remained in terrorist custody. "Package now in secondary building, east side. Multiple guards posted outside." "Roger, stand by for execute order." The radio fell silent, leaving Vasquez alone with her thoughts and the weight of the rifle beneath her cheek. In 45 minutes, Morrison's team would begin their assault, and she would transition from passive observer to active participant in what was about to become a very violent afternoon. She began her final pre-engagement checks. Rifle 0 confirmed, ammunition count verified, range cards updated with current atmospheric conditions. At 13:55 hours, Morrison's voice cut through the desert silence. "All elements, this is Blade 7. Execute, execute, execute." Phase 2 had begun. Vasquez immediately shifted her scope to the guard tower on the compound's northeast corner, where a sentry was scanning the approaching terrain with binoculars. At 3,247 meters, the guard appeared as little more than a human-shaped blur, but Vasquez had made shots like this before. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and began applying pressure to the Barrett's trigger with the same smooth motion she'd practiced thousands of times. The rifle thundered, its massive .50 caliber round cracking through the superheated air at 2,800 feet per second. 3 seconds later, the guard tower's occupant simply vanished in a spray of dust and debris, his body tumbling from the elevated position like a discarded puppet. "Target down," Vasquez reported calmly, already shifting her scope to acquire the next threat. The compound erupted into chaos as the reality of the situation penetrated the shocked silence that followed the first sniper shot. Vasquez watched through her scope as armed figures scrambled for cover, their disciplined defensive posture dissolving into panic as they realized they were under attack by an invisible enemy who could reach out and kill them from impossible distances. Her second shot took out a heavy machine gun position on the western wall, the massive .50 caliber round not only eliminating the gunner but destroying the weapon itself in a spectacular explosion of flying metal and concrete. The psychological effect was exactly what Morrison needed. Defenders who should have been concentrating on the assault team's approach were instead scanning the surrounding ridgelines for threats they couldn't see and couldn't engage. "Ghost, this is Blade 7. We're taking fire from the main gate. Can you suppress?" Vasquez was already shifting her aim point before Morrison finished his transmission. Through the scope, She could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the compound's entrance, the defenders pouring automatic weapons fire toward the wadi where the assault team was making their final approach. Her third shot silenced the loudest weapon, a PKM machine gun whose operator had been swept aside by the Barrett's devastating impact. "Main gate suppressed," she reported, cycling the rifle's bolt to chamber another round. "Multiple targets still active northeast quadrant." The engagement settled into a deadly rhythm. Morrison's team advanced under cover of Vasquez's precision fire, each shot eliminating key defensive positions or forcing defenders to abandon their posts and seek cover in areas where they couldn't effectively engage the assault force. It was a complex ballet of violence choreographed by years of training and experience, each participant playing their role with professional competence. At 14:07 hours, Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Breach successful, entering primary structure." Through her scope, Vasquez could see the assault team's explosive entry into the main building, smoke and dust billowing from the shattered doorway as the SEALs flowed through the breach with practiced efficiency. Her job now was to prevent enemy reinforcements from interfering with the extraction, while maintaining overwatch for any threats that might emerge from the compound's interior. A movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention, 3 figures running from a secondary building toward what appeared to be a communications bunker. If they reached that position, they could call for reinforcements that would turn the extraction into a fighting withdrawal against overwhelming odds. Vasquez's fourth shot dropped the lead runner at 800 meters from the assault team's position, her bullet arriving before the sound of the rifle's report. "Ghost has interdicted possible communications team," she transmitted. "2 personnel remaining, moving to covered position." "Copy Ghost, continue suppression." The 5th shot missed, the bullet striking concrete just behind the running figures as they dove for cover behind a low wall. Vasquez cursed silently and made a minute adjustment to her scope, compensating for the wind shift she should have noticed earlier. At this distance, even the smallest error in calculation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her 6th shot found its mark, the .50 caliber round punching through the concrete wall as if it were made of cardboard. The 7th shot eliminated the final threat, leaving the communications bunker silent and abandoned. "Area secure, continuing overwatch," Vasquez reported, already scanning for new threats. In the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south, their extraction platform, right on schedule. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which in Morrison's experience usually meant they were about 5 minutes away from a catastrophic surprise. The MH-60M Black Hawk appeared as a dark speck against the southern sky, its rotor noise announcing the arrival of the extraction phase to anyone within 20 kilometers. Vasquez tracked the helicopter's approach through her scope while simultaneously maintaining surveillance of the compound below, where Morrison's team was conducting their search for Hassan and her children. "Package located," Morrison's voice came through the radio, slightly breathless from the physical demands of clearing rooms under combat conditions. 2 adults, 2 children, all in good condition, moving to extraction point Alpha. Vasquez shifted her scope to cover the route Morrison's team would use to move from the main building to the designated helicopter landing zone, a relatively flat area approximately 200 meters northeast of the compound. The path would take them through open ground for roughly half the distance, making them vulnerable to any remaining defenders who might emerge from hidden positions. Through her magnified view of the compound, she watched 8 figures emerge from the main building, Morrison's 7-man team plus Hassan carrying her youngest child. They moved in tactical formation, weapons oriented outward, scanning for threats as they crossed the courtyard toward the outer wall. The older child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, stayed close to his mother while simultaneously trying to take in everything happening around him. The Black Hawk settled into its landing zone with practiced precision, its crew chief already scanning the surrounding terrain for threats, while the pilots maintained idle power settings for immediate departure. The aircraft's door-mounted M134 minigun pointed toward the compound, ready to provide suppressing fire if enemy forces attempted to interfere with the extraction. "Ghost, be advised, we have movement in the secondary buildings," Vasquez transmitted, tracking several armed figures who were attempting to reposition to engage the extraction team. Multiple personnel, southeast quadrant, armed and moving to intercept. "Copy, Ghost, can you engage?" Vasquez was already settling her crosshairs on the lead figure, a bearded man carrying what appeared to be an RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade launcher. At this distance, in these atmospheric conditions, with a moving target, the shot would push her skills to their absolute limit. She controlled her breathing, tracked the target's movement, and calculated the complex ballistics required to put a half-inch diameter bullet exactly where it needed to be. The Barrett's thunderous report echoed across the desert as her eighth shot of the engagement sent a 750-grain Raufoss multi-purpose round streaking toward its target. The bullet arrived with devastating effect, eliminating not just the RPG operator, but detonating the warhead he'd been carrying in a spectacular fireball that sent the remaining defenders scrambling for cover. "Threat neutralized," Vasquez reported, already searching for additional targets. Morrison's team reached the helicopter without further incident, the passengers quickly boarding while the crew chief provided security, and the pilots spooled up to take off power. Within 90 seconds of touchdown, the Black Hawk was lifting off with its precious cargo, banking south toward the extraction corridor in safety. "Package is secure," Morrison's voice came through the radio, relief evident despite his professional tone. "Ghost, we're clear of the objective area. Begin exfiltration to pick up Point Bravo." Vasquez acknowledged and began the methodical process of securing her equipment and preparing to move. Her part in the mission was far from over. She still needed to reach the alternate pickup zone 15 kilometers to the northeast, where another helicopter would be waiting to extract her once Morrison's team was safely out of the area. As she packed her rifle into its carrying case and gathered her gear, Vasquez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 9 shots fired, 8 confirmed hits at distances that would have been considered impossible just a generation ago. The mission was a success. Hassan and her children were safe, and no American personnel had been casualties. The exfiltration began as a routine movement through terrain that Vasquez had studied extensively during mission planning. The 15-kilometer journey to pick up Point Bravo would take her through a series of wadis and ridgelines that offered both concealment from observation and multiple route options if she encountered hostile forces. She moved at a steady pace that balanced speed with noise discipline, her GPS receiver providing precise navigation while her training and instincts kept her alert for potential threats. 3 kilometers from the objective area, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Ghost, this is Blade 7. Be advised, we have multiple vehicles departing the compound area, heading northeast on your approximate bearing." Vasquez immediately sought cover behind a cluster of boulders and extended her rifle's bipod, scanning the terrain behind her through the high-magnification scope. In the distance, she could see dust clouds rising from what appeared to be at least 4 vehicles moving at high speed along a dirt road that roughly paralleled her planned route. The implications were immediately clear. Someone had survived the assault and was organizing a pursuit, either to recover Hassan or to exact revenge on the forces that had humiliated them. "Copy, Blade 7. I have visual on dust signatures. Estimate 4 to 6 vehicles moving northeast. Request immediate update on extraction timeline." Morrison's response came back quickly. "Pickup is still 60 mics out. Can you evade and avoid contact?" Vasquez studied the terrain through her scope, calculating distances and movement rates. The vehicles were traveling on established roads while she was moving cross-country, which gave them a significant speed advantage. More critically, they appeared to be heading directly toward the area where Pickup Point Bravo was located, which suggested either exceptional tactical intuition on their part or intelligence about American extraction procedures. Negative on evasion, she reported. Current vehicle track will intersect extraction point in approximately 40 minutes. Recommend alternate pickup location. Stand by. While Morrison coordinated with the helicopter crews and higher headquarters, Vasquez continued monitoring the approaching vehicles through her scope. As they drew closer, she could make out more details. Technical vehicles mounting heavy machine guns, pickup trucks filled with armed personnel, and what appeared to be a command vehicle with additional communication antennas. This wasn't a ragtag group of angry fighters. It was an organized pursuit force with enough firepower to pose a serious threat to a single helicopter. The radio crackled again. Ghost, Pickup Point Charlie is now primary extraction site. Grid coordinates follow. Vasquez copied the new coordinates and immediately began plotting a route to the alternate pickup zone, which was located 8 kilometers further northeast in terrain that would be even more challenging to traverse. The change added at least an hour to her movement time, assuming she could maintain her current pace without encountering the pursuit force. She was preparing to move when her scope caught movement that made her blood run cold. The lead vehicle in the convoy had stopped, and several figures had dismounted to examine what was clearly a set of tracks in the sandy soil. Even at this distance, she could see them pointing in her direction and gesturing animatedly as they discussed their discovery. Blade 7, this is Ghost. Be advised, Pursuit Force has identified my trail. They know my approximate location and direction of movement. Morrison's response was immediate and uncompromising. Ghost, you are authorized to engage threat with all available means. Do not allow compromise of extraction operations. Vasquez settled behind her rifle and began ranging targets, her mind automatically shifting from evasion mode to combat mode. The lead vehicle was approximately 1,800 meters away, well within the Barrett's effective range even under these challenging atmospheric conditions. She had 17 rounds remaining in her ammunition loadout, more than enough to disrupt the pursuit if she used them effectively. The first shot struck the lead vehicle's engine block with the devastating impact of a small artillery round, the .50 caliber bullet punching through the hood and destroying the motor in a spectacular explosion of steam and flying metal. The vehicle coasted to a stop as its occupants bailaed out, seeking cover behind the disabled truck while scanning the surrounding ridgelines for their invisible attacker. Vasquez shifted her aim to the second vehicle before its occupants could react to the destruction of their lead element. Her second shot took out the front tire and part of the suspension, sending the truck careening off the road and into a drainage ditch where it rolled twice before coming to rest on its side. Through her scope, she could see armed figures crawling out of the wreckage, some moving under their own power while others appeared to be injured. The remaining vehicles in the convoy immediately dispersed, their drivers recognizing that staying bunched together on the road would make them easy targets for whatever weapon was engaging them from long range. Vasquez tracked the third vehicle as it turned off the road and began moving cross-country, its driver attempting to use terrain features for concealment while closing the distance to her position. Her third shot missed, the bullet striking a rocky outcropping just behind the moving truck as the driver changed direction unpredictably. Vasquez cursed under her breath and made a quick adjustment to her lead calculation, accounting for the vehicle's acceleration and the crosswind that had picked up as the afternoon progressed. The fourth shot found its mark, punching through the truck's rear axle and sending it skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust and debris. Blade 7, this is Ghost, she transmitted while cycling the rifle's bolt. Have engaged pursuit force. 3 vehicles disabled. remaining elements dismounting and moving to assault positions. Estimate 12 to 15 personnel, all armed, approximately 1,500 meters from my position. Copy Ghost. Extraction bird is inbound. ETA 20 minutes to pick up Point Charlie. Can you break contact and move? Through her scope, Vasquez could see the tactical situation developing with crystal clarity. The surviving fighters were spreading out in a classic assault formation, using available cover to advance toward her last known position while maintaining fire discipline to avoid revealing their exact locations. These weren't amateur fighters. They were moving with the coordination and tactical awareness of experienced combat veterans. Negative on break contact, she replied. Enemy forces are too close and moving to cut off my withdrawal route. I'm going to have to hold this position and engage. Morrison's voice came back immediately. Ghost, that's 15 hostiles against 1. Those are not favorable odds. Vasquez adjusted her scope's magnification and began systematically scanning the terrain where the enemy fighters were advancing. Years of combat experience had taught her that engagements like this weren't won by superior numbers or firepower. They were won by superior position, superior marksmanship, and the kind of cold-blooded determination that came from knowing there was no alternative to victory. "Commander," she said quietly into her radio, "I've been in worse situations. Trust me to do my job." The fifth shot dropped an enemy fighter who had exposed himself while moving between cover positions. The sixth shot eliminated a machine gun team that was attempting to establish a base of fire on her left flank. Each engagement forced the remaining attackers to recalculate their approach, buying precious time while reducing their effective combat strength. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander, the same tall figure she'd observed earlier at the compound, directing his remaining forces with hand signals and tactical discipline that reminded her uncomfortably of her own training. He was keeping his men spread out, using fire and movement techniques to advance while minimizing their exposure to her precision fire. Her seventh shot missed as the target dove for cover at the last possible moment, the bullet striking the ground where he'd been standing a fraction of a second earlier. The eighth shot took down another fighter, but now the surviving enemies were close enough that she could hear their voices echoing across the rocky terrain as they coordinated their final assault. "Ghost, be advised extraction bird is 5 minutes out," Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Can you hold position?" Vasquez chambered her ninth round and settled her crosshairs on a figure who was attempting to flank her position from the east. "I'm not going anywhere, Commander." The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as the surviving enemy fighters closed to within 800 meters of Vasquez's position. At this range, their AK-47s and PKM machine guns could deliver effective suppressing fire while they maneuvered for the final assault. Vasquez found herself caught in the classic sniper's dilemma. Her long-range precision rifle was devastatingly effective at distance, but increasingly vulnerable to coordinated assault by multiple opponents armed with automatic weapons. Her ninth shot eliminated the fighter attempting to flank from the east, but the engagement revealed her muzzle flash to the remaining attackers. Almost immediately, automatic weapons fire began impacting the rocks around her position, forcing her to keep her head down and making precise shooting nearly impossible. The distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead mixed with the whine of ricochets and the thunder of multiple weapons firing simultaneously. "Taking effective fire," she reported into her radio, having to shout over the noise of incoming rounds. "Enemy forces have identified my position and are maneuvering for close assault." "Ghost, extraction bird is 2 minutes out. Can you move to the pickup zone?" Vasquez risked a quick glance toward pickup Point Charlie, visible as a relatively flat area approximately 600 meters northeast of her current position. The route would take her across open ground that was completely dominated by enemy fire positions, making movement tantamount to suicide. She was effectively pinned down, dependent on her remaining ammunition and whatever tactical advantages she could create. Negative on movement. I'm fixed in position. Tell the bird to stay clear until I can suppress these hostiles. She rolled slightly to the left, exposing just enough of herself to acquire a target through her scope. The enemy commander was visible for perhaps 2 seconds as he moved between cover positions, directing his subordinates' advance with the confidence of someone who believed victory was inevitable. Vasquez's 10th shot caught him center mass, the massive .50 caliber bullet lifting him off his feet and eliminating the tactical leadership that had been coordinating the assault. The immediate effect was exactly what she'd hoped for: confusion and hesitation, as the remaining fighters lost their primary source of command and control. Several of them began calling out in Arabic, their voices carrying panic and uncertainty as they tried to determine what to do without their leader's guidance. Vasquez used the momentary respite to shift positions, moving 20 meters to the south where a different cluster of rocks provided cover from a new angle. The movement drew immediate fire, but she managed to reach the new position without taking a hit. From here, she had a slightly better view of the enemy positions and clear fields of fire towards several targets. Her 11th shot took down a machine gunner who had been providing covering fire for the other fighters' movement. The 12th shot eliminated another rifleman who had exposed himself, while attempting to bound forward to a new position. With each successful engagement, she could hear the remaining enemies becoming more hesitant, their rate of advance slowing as they began to appreciate the lethality of their invisible opponent. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, echoing off the surrounding ridgelines as the extraction aircraft approached Pickup Point Charlie. Through her scope, Vasquez could see several enemy fighters turning their attention toward the sound, recognizing that their prey was about to escape if they didn't act quickly. "Ghost, this is Dustoff 72, a new voice crackled through her radio, the extraction helicopter's pilot. "I'm holding at 2 clicks south due to hostile fire in the pickup zone. Request immediate suppression so I can complete the extraction." Vasquez chambered her 13th round and began methodically engaging every enemy position she could identify. "Roger, Dustoff. Beginning suppression now. Give me 30 seconds, then come in fast and low from the southwest." The next 30 seconds stretched into an eternity of precisely controlled violence. Vasquez worked her rifle with the mechanical precision of a master craftsman, each shot carefully aimed and timed to maximum effect. Her 13th round took out an enemy fighter who was setting up an RPG position that could have threatened the incoming helicopter. The 14th shot eliminated a sniper who had been trying to establish a counter-sniper position on the eastern ridgeline. "Dustoff 72, this is Ghost. Suppression complete, pickup zone is clear. Come in now." The US-60 Black Hawk appeared over the southern ridge like an avenging angel, its pilots pushing the aircraft to maximum performance as they dove toward the pickup zone. The door gunner opened fire with his M240 machine gun, laying down suppressing fire that kept the remaining enemy fighters pinned in their positions, while the helicopter flared for landing. Vasquez waited until the aircraft touched down before beginning her movement, sprinting across the open ground between her position and the helicopter while carrying her rifle and essential equipment. Behind her, she could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s as the surviving enemies attempted to engage her during the withdrawal, but their fire was wild and ineffective. She dove through the helicopter's open door just as the pilots applied maximum power for takeoff, the aircraft lifting off in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. The door gunner continued firing until they cleared the immediate area, his tracers stitching patterns across the ground where the enemy fighters had taken cover. "Ghost is secure," she reported into her radio, breathing heavily from the exertion and adrenaline of the final sprint. "All personnel accounted for, extraction complete." "Copy, Ghost," Morrison's voice came back with obvious relief. "Outstanding work. Package is secure at the forward operating base. Mission successful." As the helicopter climbed to cruising altitude and turned southwest toward friendly territory, Vasquez allowed herself to relax for the first time in 14 hours. Through the open door, she could see the compound where the mission had begun, now dark and abandoned except for the vehicles she had destroyed during the engagement. Somewhere down there, Amara Hassan and her children were beginning new lives, safe from the terrorists who would have killed them without hesitation. She disassembled her rifle and secured it in its carrying case, her movements automatic after years of practice. 14 shots fired during the mission, 8 confirmed kills at the compound, 6 more during the running engagement with the pursuit force. Every round had found its mark when it mattered. Every engagement had achieved its tactical objective. The crew chief handed her a bottle of water and a communications headset so she could monitor the flight's progress. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice above the engine noise, "I've been flying these missions for 8 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. Those were some incredible shots." Vasquez took a long drink of water before responding. "Just doing my job, Chief." But even as she said the words, she knew that what had happened today went far beyond routine military operations. The shots she'd made at the compound, the precision engagement of the pursuit force, the tactical decision-making under extreme pressure, all of it represented the culmination of years of training and experience that very few people in the world possessed. As the helicopter carried her toward safety, Vasquez found herself thinking about the mission's significance beyond the immediate tactical success. Hassan's intelligence about chemical weapons programs could prevent attacks that might kill thousands of innocent people. The demonstration of American precision and capability would send a message to terrorist organizations throughout the region. The debriefing at Camp Lemonnier took place in a secure conference room that smelled of stale coffee and air conditioning, its walls covered with maps and intelligence photos that told the story of ongoing operations throughout the Horn of Africa. Morrison sat at one end of a polished conference table, still wearing the desert camouflage uniform he'd worn during the mission, while Vasquez occupied a chair near the middle, her rifle case propped against the wall behind her. Colonel Hendricks presided over the session, flanked by intelligence officers who took detailed notes as each participant recounted their portion of the operation. The entire debriefing was being recorded for analysis by specialists who would study every aspect of the mission to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. "Captain Vasquez," Hendricks said, consulting her notes, "your preliminary report indicates 14 shots fired during the engagement phase, with confirmed elimination of 12 targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Can you walk us through the ballistic challenges you encountered and how you compensated for environmental factors?" Vasquez opened a small notebook where she'd recorded every detail of her shooting during the mission. Years of experience had taught her that accurate record-keeping was essential for continuous improvement, and that information gathered during real-world engagements was invaluable for training future snipers. "Atmospheric conditions were challenging throughout the engagement," she began. "Temperature reached 42 degrees Celsius by midday, creating significant heat mirage effects that required constant parallax adjustments. Wind was variable, generally from the southwest at 8 to 12 knots, but with occasional gusts up to 15 knots that required real-time compensation." She flipped through several pages of notes, each filled with precise measurements and calculations that most people would find incomprehensible. Range to primary targets varied from 1,800 meters for the closest compound positions to 3,247 meters for the initial guard tower elimination. All shots were taken with Raufoss multi-purpose ammunition, which provided consistent ballistic performance across the engagement envelope. Morrison leaned forward, his expression showing genuine professional interest. "Captain, I have to ask, that first shot at over 3,000 meters in those atmospheric conditions, how confident were you about making that engagement?" Vasquez met his eyes directly, her expression serious but not boastful. Commander, confidence comes from preparation and experience. I'd ranged that target during my initial reconnaissance, calculated the ballistic solution multiple times, and confirmed the environmental factors through observation. When you've made shots like that before, you develop a sense for what's possible and what isn't. The intelligence officer sitting to Hendricks' left looked up from his notes. Captain, your record indicates this wasn't your first engagement at extreme range. Can you provide context for how you developed these capabilities? For a moment, Vasquez was silent, her thoughts drifting back to the experiences that had shaped her into the sniper she'd become. The helicopter crash in Afghanistan that had ended her flying career, but opened a new chapter in her military service. The months of recovery and rehabilitation that had given her time to study ballistics and marksmanship theory. The patient mentorship of Master Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Mendoza, the Marine Corps' most experienced sniper instructor, who had recognized her potential and pushed her to develop skills that exceeded normal human limitations. "Ma'am," she said finally, "it started with necessity. After my aircraft was shot down, I found myself in situations where precision shooting was the difference between mission success and failure, sometimes between life and death. I had natural ability with a rifle, but natural ability only takes you so far. The rest comes from thousands of hours of practice, careful study of ballistic science, and learning from people who have walked this path before." Hendricks made additional notes before continuing. The pursuit engagement represents a different type of challenge: multiple moving targets, degraded atmospheric conditions, tactical pressure from enemy forces closing on your position. How did you maintain accuracy under those circumstances? Vasquez considered the question carefully. The pursuit engagement had pushed her skills to their absolute limit, requiring split-second decisions and precise shooting under conditions that would have defeated most marksmen. The fact that she'd successfully engaged multiple targets while under direct fire was something that would be studied and analyzed for years to come. Training and experience, ma'am. When you've spent enough time behind a rifle, certain aspects become instinctive. You learn to read atmospheric conditions, to calculate lead and windage automatically, to maintain focus despite external stressors. The key is mental discipline, staying calm, controlling your breathing, trusting your equipment and your training. The formal debriefing concluded after 3 hours of detailed analysis, but Morrison lingered as the other officers filed out of the conference room. He'd been studying Vasquez throughout the session, noting the precise way she described complex ballistic calculations and the matter-of-fact tone she used when discussing achievements that bordered on the impossible. "Captain," he said once they were alone, "I owe you an apology. When I first saw you in that armory, I made assumptions based on preconceptions that had no basis in reality. Today, you saved my team and made the mission possible." Vasquez looked up from gathering her notes, her expression showing mild surprise at Morrison's admission. In her experience, special operations officers rarely acknowledged when they'd been wrong about anything, particularly regarding personnel they'd initially doubted. "No apology necessary, Commander. You had no way of knowing my background or capabilities. In your position, I probably would have made similar assumptions." Morrison shook his head. "That's generous, but it doesn't excuse professional prejudice. I've worked with some of the best snipers in the military, and what I witnessed today was beyond anything I've seen before. That first shot, over 3 kilometers in those conditions, most people would consider that impossible." "Most people haven't spent 5 years learning how to make impossible shots," Vasquez replied with a slight smile. "Commander, can I ask you something? When you first saw that insignia on my sleeve, the 3,247-meter designation, what did you think?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe some kind of unofficial unit marking. The idea that someone had made a confirmed kill at that distance seemed unlikely." "And now?" Now I understand that there are people in this world who operate at levels that redefine what's possible. Today, you didn't just provide fire support. You conducted a masterclass in precision shooting under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Vasquez stood and shouldered her rifle case, preparing to leave the conference room. Commander, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've learned that respect is something you earn through performance, not through reputation or credentials. Today was just another mission, another opportunity to do the job I've been trained for. As she reached the door, Morrison called out one more question. Captain, that Insignia, 247 meters. Where did that shot take place? Vasquez paused, her hand on the door handle. Afghanistan, 2021. Taliban commander who had been orchestrating attacks on coalition forces throughout Helmand province. The shot was taken from a ridgeline overlooking the Kajaki Valley during Operation Mountain Lion. Atmospheric conditions were perfect. Wind was calm. Target was stationary. Sometimes everything aligns exactly as it should. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving Morrison alone with the realization that he'd just worked alongside a living legend. The ghost of Helmand Province, the sniper whose achievements had been whispered about in special operations circles for years, was a soft-spoken Marine captain who polished her own rifle and treated impossible shots as routine professional tasks. Later that evening, Morrison would call his team together and tell them exactly who had been watching their backs during the mission. The revelation would fundamentally change how they thought about capability and assumption, about the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of the package it came in. But for now, he sat alone in the conference room, staring at his mission notes and trying to comprehend what he'd witnessed. 14 shots, 12 confirmed kills at ranges that defied belief, all delivered with the calm professionalism of someone who had long ago mastered the art of precision violence. Outside, the desert wind whistled through the camp structures, carrying dust and the distant sound of aircraft engines. Somewhere in that vast expanse of sand and rock, other missions were being planned, other operators were preparing for combat, other legends were being written in blood and gunpowder. And in a small room near the armory, Captain Zara, Ghost, Vasquez was cleaning her rifle with the same methodical attention to detail that had made her the most lethal sniper in Marine Corps history. 2 weeks later, the story began to spread through the military community with the inexorable momentum of all truly exceptional events. It started in the Special Operations community, where Morrison's team shared details of the mission with trusted colleagues during informal conversations at the O Club and in secure communication channels. The specifics varied with each telling, but the core elements remained consistent. A female Marine sniper had provided precision fire support at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers, eliminating multiple targets under conditions that would have challenged the most experienced marksmen. Master Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Mendoza received the first official report while reviewing training curricula at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico. He'd been Vasquez's primary instructor during her transition from aviation to ground operations, and he'd recognized her potential from the beginning. Reading Morrison's after-action report, he felt a mixture of pride and vindication that his former student had achieved something truly extraordinary. "Sir," he told the school's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, "I think we need to revise our maximum effective range estimates for the M82A1 system. One of our graduates just made confirmed kills at distances we've been teaching are theoretically impossible." Patterson looked up from the stack of reports covering his desk. "How impossible are we talking about, Master Guns?" 3,247 meters, sir. Multiple targets, combat conditions, perfect shot placement every time. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from mild interest to intense focus. In 30 years of military service, He'd learned to distinguish between routine excellence and the kind of performance that redefined the boundaries of human capability. This clearly fell into the latter category. "I want a complete analysis of this engagement," he said finally. "Ballistic calculations, atmospheric data, everything. If one of our people has pushed sniper capabilities into new territory, we need to understand how she did it and whether we can replicate the training methodology." Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, senior officers in the Special Operations Command were reviewing the mission's strategic implications. The successful extraction of Hassan had provided intelligence that would prevent multiple terrorist attacks, but the demonstration of American precision capabilities was equally significant. Word was already filtering back through intelligence networks that terrorist organizations throughout the region were reconsidering their operational security procedures in light of evidence that American snipers could reach out and eliminate targets at previously unimaginable distances. General Patricia Hayes, commander of Joint Special Operations Command, studied Morrison's report with the analytical mind that had made her one of the most respected officers in the special operations community. The tactical success was impressive, but what caught her attention was the psychological impact described by intelligence assets throughout the region. "Colonel," she said to her chief of staff, "arrange a meeting with this Captain Vasquez. I want to understand what we're dealing with here, and I want to know if we have other personnel operating at similar levels." The ripple effects continued to spread as word of the mission reached academic institutions, where ballistic researchers were studying the theoretical limits of precision shooting. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of applied physics at MIT who specialized in external ballistics, received an unofficial briefing from a former student now working for the Department of Defense. The data she reviewed challenged several fundamental assumptions about maximum effective ranges for small arms systems. "This is remarkable," she told her research team during their next meeting. "These shot distances require ballistic calculations that account for variables we normally consider negligible. The Coriolis effect, atmospheric density variations, even minute changes in gravitational field strength. Whoever made these shots was operating at the absolute pinnacle of what's physically possible." Her graduate students exchanged glances that mixed excitement with disbelief. They'd been studying theoretical ballistics for years, but the idea that someone was actually achieving these results in combat conditions was almost inconceivable. Back at Camp Lemonnier, Vasquez continued her routine duties, seemingly unaware of the attention her performance had generated throughout the military community. She maintained her equipment, conducted training with other special operations personnel, and prepared for future missions with the same methodical professionalism that had characterized her entire career. But late at night, when the base was quiet except for the hum of generators and the distant sound of aircraft operations, she sometimes stood outside her quarters and looked up at the star-filled desert sky. Somewhere out there, other snipers were training, pushing themselves to achieve levels of precision that most people would consider impossible. Her mission had become part of the legend that surrounded the profession, another story that would be told and retold until fact blended with myth. She thought about the young Marines who would read about her achievements and wonder if they had what it took to follow in her footsteps. Some of them would discover they possessed the rare combination of natural ability, mental discipline, and relentless dedication required to excel at extreme-range precision shooting. Others would find their calling in different aspects of military service. But all of them would know that the boundaries of human performance were not fixed, that with enough skill and determination, it was possible to achieve things that had never been done before. The invitation arrived through official channels 3 months after Operation Nightfall, bearing the seal of the Marine Corps Commandant and marked with classification codes that indicated the recipient was being summoned to discuss matters of strategic importance. Vasquez read the message twice before fully comprehending its significance. She was being invited to address the Marine Corps War College about advanced sniper tactics and the future of precision shooting. The drive to Quantico from Camp Lejeune gave her time to consider how much the military landscape had changed since her legendary shot in Afghanistan. Modern warfare increasingly demanded precision over firepower, surgical strikes, rather than massive assaults. In that evolving environment, snipers like herself represented a new paradigm of military effectiveness. Individual operators capable of strategic impact through precisely applied force. The War College auditorium was filled with senior officers from all branches of the military, their uniforms displaying ribbons and badges that told the collective story of America's recent conflicts. As Vasquez took the stage, she noticed how the normal pre-presentation chatter died away, replaced by an attentiveness that spoke to their genuine interest in learning from someone who had redefined their understanding of what was possible. "Gentlemen and fellow Marines," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system, "I'm here today to discuss the evolution of precision shooting capabilities and what that means for future military operations. But before we talk about technology and tactics, I want to address something more fundamental: the relationship between perception and performance." She clicked a remote control, and the main screen displayed a satellite image of the compound where Operation Nightfall had taken place. Red circles marked the positions from which she'd engaged targets, with distance measurements that drew audible gasps from several audience members. 6 months ago, most of you would have considered shots at these ranges to be impossible. Today, they represent a new baseline for what we expect from our precision shooting capabilities. The question isn't whether these engagements are possible. We've proven they are. The question is how we develop and deploy personnel who can consistently perform at these levels. A Marine colonel in the front row raised his hand. "Captain, what do you see as the primary limiting factors for extreme-range precision shooting? Is it equipment, training, or human capability?" Vasquez considered the question carefully. "Sir, it's all three, but not in the way most people think. Modern equipment is more than adequate for these engagements if properly employed. Training methodologies exist to develop the necessary skills, though they require time and resources that exceed current standards. The real limitation is identifying personnel who possess the mental characteristics required for this type of work." "Can you elaborate on those mental characteristics?" "Patience, sir. The ability to remain absolutely still for hours while maintaining peak concentration. Emotional control that allows clear thinking under extreme stress. Mathematical intuition for ballistic calculations. And perhaps most importantly, the kind of obsessive attention to detail that drives someone to spend thousands of hours perfecting techniques that most people would consider adequate after a few hundred." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a graph tracking accuracy improvements over time. "This represents my personal development as a precision shooter over 8 years of dedicated practice. Notice that improvements don't follow a linear progression. They come in sudden jumps followed by long plateaus. Breaking through those plateaus requires the kind of commitment that most people aren't willing to make." An Air Force general near the back of the auditorium stood up. "Captain, from a strategic perspective, how do we scale these capabilities across the force? We can't turn every sniper into someone who can make 3,000-meter shots." "You're absolutely right, sir. This isn't about mass production. It's about identifying and developing rare talent. In my opinion, we need specialized programs that can take individuals with exceptional potential and provide them with the resources necessary to push human performance into previously unexplored territory." The presentation continued for another hour, covering technical aspects of long-range shooting, training methodologies, and the strategic implications of having snipers who could eliminate targets at distances that rendered traditional defensive measures ineffective. But throughout the discussion, the underlying theme remained constant. Military effectiveness in the modern era would increasingly depend on finding and developing individuals capable of extraordinary performance. As the session concluded, Vasquez found herself surrounded by officers who wanted to discuss specific aspects of her presentation. Their questions revealed a military community that was grappling with fundamental changes in how warfare was conducted, trying to understand how individual excellence could create strategic advantages that traditional approaches could not match. The transformation in how the military community viewed precision shooting capabilities became evident over the following months as requests for specialized training began arriving from commands throughout the Department of Defense. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School found itself redesigning curricula to address shooting techniques that had previously been considered theoretical, while equipment manufacturers worked to develop systems capable of supporting engagements at unprecedented ranges. Vasquez found herself at the center of this evolution, her expertise sought by organizations ranging from special operations units to military research institutions. The quiet Marine captain who had once been dismissed by colleagues was now recognized as someone who possessed knowledge that could fundamentally change how America projected military power. The assignment to develop advanced sniper training programs came with promotion to major and transfer to a newly created position within the Marine Corps Systems Command. Her mission was to identify personnel with exceptional potential, develop training methodologies that could consistently produce superior results, and work with industry partners to create equipment optimized for extreme-range precision shooting. Major, her new commanding officer told her during their first meeting, "You've become something of a legend in the special operations community. Now we need to turn that legend into a systematic capability that other people can learn and apply." The challenge was more complex than most people realized. What Vasquez had accomplished required not just technical skills, but a rare combination of mental characteristics that couldn't be easily taught or replicated. Natural marksmanship ability could be identified and developed, but the psychological resilience required for combat shooting at extreme ranges was something different entirely. She began by studying the personnel files of every sniper in the Marine Corps, looking for indicators that might predict success in advanced precision shooting programs. High scores on marksmanship tests were obviously important, but she found herself paying more attention to subtler factors: performance under stress, ability to maintain concentration during extended periods, mathematical aptitude, and what military psychologists called emotional regulation capability. The first experimental training class consisted of 12 Marines selected from a pool of more than 200 volunteers. Each had demonstrated exceptional baseline marksmanship skills, but more importantly, each had shown the kind of mental discipline that suggested they might be capable of performing at levels that pushed human capability to its limits. "Gentlemen," Vasquez told them on the first day of training, "everything you think you know about precision shooting is about to change. We're not here to make you better snipers. We're here to make you capable of shots that most people would consider impossible." The training program that followed was unlike anything that had been attempted before in military marksmanship instruction. Days began before dawn and continued past sunset, with students spending hours in shooting positions that tested their physical and mental endurance. Classroom instruction covered advanced ballistics, atmospheric physics, and mathematical calculations that resembled graduate-level engineering coursework. But the most important element was something that couldn't be taught directly: the development of what Vasquez called shooter's intuition, the ability to integrate complex environmental factors and make precise adjustments based on subtle cues that existed below the threshold of conscious awareness. "At extreme range," she explained to her students, "you can't rely entirely on mathematical calculations. The variables are too numerous and change too quickly. You need to develop an instinctive understanding of how your rifle performs under different conditions, how atmospheric factors affect bullet trajectory, how to read wind patterns that aren't visible through your scope." Only 4 of the original 12 students completed the full training program. The others were eliminated not because they lacked skill or dedication, but because they didn't possess the rare combination of characteristics required for this specialized mission. Those who succeeded became the nucleus of a new generation of precision shooters, whose capabilities would redefine military expectations. As word of the program's success spread throughout the defense community, Vasquez found herself briefing senior Pentagon officials about the strategic implications of having snipers who could eliminate targets at distances that made traditional force protection measures obsolete. The paradigm shift was profound. Individual shooters could now influence tactical situations in ways that previously required entire units. The legend of the ghost of Helmand Province had evolved into something larger and more significant, a new standard for human performance that would inspire and challenge military professionals for generations to come. The ceremony took place on a crisp October morning at Marine Corps Base Quantico, the autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant echo of training exercises. Major Zara Vasquez stood at attention before an audience that included the Commandant of the Marine Corps, senior officers from across the Department of Defense, and representatives from allied nations who had come to witness the recognition of achievements that had redefined military capability. The citation being read aloud chronicled a career that had evolved from routine competence to legendary excellence. The helicopter crash that had ended her flying career but opened new paths to service. The development of shooting skills that pushed human performance into previously unexplored territory. The missions that had eliminated high-value targets at ranges that defied conventional understanding. And finally, the creation of training programs that would ensure her knowledge and capabilities could be passed on to future generations. The Navy Cross is awarded to Major Zara Vasquez, United States Marine Corps, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations involving conflict with an armed enemy of the United States. The Commandant's voice carried across the parade ground. Major Vasquez's exceptional marksmanship, tactical expertise, and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment resulted in the successful extraction of high-value intelligence assets and the elimination of terrorist threats that posed significant danger to coalition forces and civilian populations. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Vasquez reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young pilot who had once dreamed of flying combat helicopters could never have imagined that her greatest contributions would come from behind the scope of a precision rifle, engaging targets at distances that most people would consider impossible. The ceremony concluded with a reception where colleagues, mentors, and students gathered to celebrate not just individual achievement, but the broader transformation in military capability that her work had inspired. Master Gunnery Sergeant Mendoza, now retired but still serving as a civilian instructor, approached with a smile that mixed pride with satisfaction. "Major," he said, extending his hand, "I always knew you had potential, but what you've accomplished exceeds anything I thought possible. You've changed how we think about the limits of human performance." Commander Morrison, now a full colonel, joined the conversation. "Zara, I've worked with special operations personnel from every branch of the military, and I've never encountered anyone who combines technical expertise with tactical effectiveness the way you do. That mission 6 months ago wasn't just successful, it was a masterclass in precision operations." The conversations continued throughout the afternoon, each exchange reinforcing the same theme. Vasquez had achieved something that transcended individual recognition. Her work had demonstrated that human capability was not fixed, that with sufficient dedication and proper training, it was possible to push performance into realms that had previously been considered theoretical. As the sun began to set over the Virginia countryside, Vasquez found herself standing alone near the memorial that honored Marines who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country. The names carved in granite reminded her that excellence in military service was ultimately measured not by personal achievement, but by contribution to the mission of protecting others. Her achievements had saved lives, the successful extraction of intelligence assets, the elimination of terrorist threats, the development of capabilities that would protect future military personnel operating in dangerous environments. But more than that, her example had shown others that the boundaries of human performance were not fixed, that dedication and proper training could unlock potential that most people never realized they possessed. The next morning would bring new challenges, advanced training programs to develop, equipment systems to test, strategic doctrines to refine. The military was evolving,